Robin Gibb spent his entire life giving the world his voice, and when he finally lost it, the people closest to him said almost nothing for over a decade. His children protected what they knew with a kind of quiet loyalty that read as grief from the outside. They answered questions carefully, deflected where they needed to, and let the public keep its assumptions intact. But silence carries weight, and 13 years after his death, that weight finally cracked something open. What his family is now sharing doesn't simply fill in gaps. It reframes nearly everything people thought they understood about the man behind the music, and some of it is harder to hear than anyone expected. The story begins not in a recording studio or on a stage, but with a boy born in a maternity home on the Isle of Man on December 22, 1949, arriving just 35 minutes before his fraternal twin, Maurice. Their parents, Hugh and Barbara Gibb, were musical by nature, restless and loving in roughly equal measure, and they moved the family from the Isle of Man to Manchester and eventually across the ocean to Redcliffe, Australia. Those early years carried a particular kind of chaos. Barry, Robin, and Maurice were known for mischief, small fires, pranks, and the kind of stunts that made adults watch them with a mixture of exasperation and nervous admiration. But underneath all the noise, something quieter was already forming. The three boys discovered harmony almost by accident, sitting together and trying to match the voices they heard on records, the Everly Brothers, Paul Anka, two voices locking into one. Instinctively, without instruction or theory, they found the layered vocal blend that would later define a generation of popular music and reshape what songwriting could sound like across an entire decade. By 1955, they performed as the Rattlesnakes in Manchester halls, raw and confident, and already aware that something happened when the three of them sang together that didn't happen alone. When that lineup fell apart, they reformed as Wee Johnny Hayes and the Blue Cats, and in 1958, the family boarded a ship to Australia, unknowingly traveling alongside a young Red Simons, another future musician who would reappear in the story later. Australia opened doors almost immediately. By 1960, the brothers appeared on television for the first time on Strictly for Moderns, and even at 10 years old, Robin's tremolo stood apart from everything around it, soft and quivering, and oddly mature for a child's voice. Festival Records signed them in the mid-1960s, and when Robin sang lead on I Don't Think It's Funny in 1965, listeners heard something that no longer sounded like a teenage voice at all. That voice would carry millions of people through joy and grief and dancing and mourning for 5 more decades, and the world would mourn its silence in May of 2012. Fame arrived fast, and the brothers were not built for what it would cost them. The first cracks appeared before anyone thought to go looking. When the Bee Gees exploded into global pop music in the late 1960s, Robin's personal life was moving at the same speed and with far less direction. He married Molly Hollis in 1968 at only 18 years old, and the connection between them was forged not by glamour, but by something far more difficult. Both were present during the Hither Green rail crash, one of Britain's most catastrophic rail disasters, a derailment that killed nearly 50 people and left many more seriously injured. Surviving something like that together creates a bond that can feel permanent, and for a time it must have. Fame and love, and the early outline of a life that looked stable from the outside. But the music industry has never been interested in stability, and the road ahead was longer and harder than either of them imagined. By the early 1970s, Robin spent most of his time in the United States, while Molly stayed in the United Kingdom raising their children, Spencer and Melissa. That distance wore the marriage down 1 year at a time, and what filled the space was not good for either of them. Stimulant use became part of Robin's daily existence during this period. Amphetamine and methadone, drugs common enough among musicians surviving the brutal rhythms of recording schedules and touring. People around him at the time later recalled that his moods shifted in ways that were difficult to anticipate. Long stretches of hyperactivity crashing into exhaustion, nights of paranoia, and a growing certainty that people close to him were working against his interests. By 1980, after years of separate lives on opposite sides of the Atlantic, Molly filed for divorce. The split turned bitter quickly. Robin violated a court order by publicly discussing their marriage, and in 1983 he served 14 days in jail as a direct result. For a man at the peak of global fame, it was a public humiliation, and one of the first visible signs that whatever was happening inside his life ran darker and deeper than the music ever let on. The second chapter of his personal life opened in 1985, when Robin married Dwina Murphy Gibb, an artist and writer whose spiritual depth and creative instincts appeared to anchor something in him that had been unsteady for years. With her help, he rebuilt what the previous decade had taken from him. Together they divided their time between Miami, the Isle of Man, and their historic Oxfordshire home, the Prebendal. And from the outside it resembled the kind of peace that follows prolonged chaos. None of it revealed what was actually happening inside the marriage. And that truth didn't fully emerge until well after Robin was gone. The open marriage had been kept so completely private that even devoted fans never suspected it. Around 2001, Robin began a relationship with Clare Yang, who worked as a housekeeper within the Gibb household, and the relationship continued across several years. In 2008, Clare gave birth to Robin's daughter, Snow. What appeared to be scandal from the outside was something Dwina had already acknowledged and accepted. Her later comments were calm and measured, entirely without bitterness. She described herself as someone who was not a jealous person, and confirmed that Clare and Snow had been provided for. The household operated under terms no one outside it ever knew, and what had been whispered about for years was finally confirmed without performance or resentment. But the emotional weight it placed on Robin was real and constant. The struggle to balance two households, to maintain loyalty to his older children, and to carry the guilt of a relationship that had moved well beyond discretion into something far more complicated than anyone on the outside understood. Professional tension ran through all of it, and had for years. Creative friction between Robin and Barry Gibb stretched back to at least 1967, when Massachusetts became a defining hit, and the question of who should carry the group's voice began surfacing in ways neither brother could easily ignore. That pressure eventually drove Robin out of the Bee Gees entirely in 1969. And even after he returned in 1970, those old resentments kept finding their way back to the surface. Fans heard polished, effortless harmony in their music. Behind the microphones, the brothers fought over identity and creative control in ways that left marks that never fully healed, and the unresolved weight of those years colored everything that came after. Then came the loss that undid everything. Maurice Gibb died in January 2003, and with him went the emotional center that had held the family together through every previous fracture. Barry's grief became anger when he believed that Maurice's widow, Yvonne, and her relatives were developing a tribute album driven more by commercial interest than genuine love. He felt blindsided and excluded, and the conflict became public. Robin, caught between loyalty to his twins' memory and the pain on Barry's side, found every step through that period painful. What the public saw as a dispute over an album was actually something harder, a struggle over grief and identity. And who had the right to represent the Bee Gees once Maurice was no longer there to hold the balance between the two remaining brothers? The distance between Barry and Robin grew wider through the 2000s, until they were barely in contact. And when Robin's cancer diagnosis arrived, he told his brother nothing. Barry later admitted he only learned Robin was dying when the end was already close, and the devastation in his words when he spoke about that silence was hard to miss. For Barry, it was impossible to comprehend. For Robin, it reflected years of emotional walls that neither man had found a way past. Robin's children have confirmed what fans suspected for a long time. The brothers loved each other at a level that went beyond ordinary feeling, and years of competition and unresolved loss built something between them that love alone could not take down. Colon cancer that had already reached his liver was what Robin faced in 2011. and his body was losing ground. But in every interview he projected certainty about recovery that people around him found hard to explain. Those close to him later said he held on to that belief with a defiance that felt almost physical, as if refusing the diagnosis through will alone. Treatment was relentless. Surgeries and rounds of chemotherapy and pain that didn't stop, and through all of it, Robin refused to stop working. Connected to hospital equipment, he continued composing the Titanic Requiem alongside his son RJ, a symphonic work written for the 100th anniversary of the Titanic disaster. The project carried personal weight that went far beyond music history. Tragedy and endurance, and the refusal to stop moving while the water closes in. That was the Titanic story, and it was his own. By April 2012, pneumonia overwhelmed him, and he slipped into a coma. Doctors told the family there was nothing left they could do. Dwina, RJ, and those closest to him gathered at the bedside and prepared themselves for what felt inevitable. And then something happened that his children still describe with a quality of stunned disbelief. As Dwina played music from the Titanic Requiem in the room, Robin's fingers began to move. His eyes opened. He smiled. Doctors described it as a medical anomaly and offered no clinical explanation that satisfied anyone who was there. RJ described it as something no medical language could adequately contain. For several days, Robin was present again, talking softly, humming melodies, telling the people around him that he wanted to get back on stage. Even at the outermost edge of what his body could hold, he was still reaching for music, still dreaming of performance, still holding on to the one thing that had organized his entire life. The body couldn't sustain it. His kidneys failed, followed by his liver. And on May 20th, 2012, surrounded by the people who loved him most, Robin Gibb died at 62, with Dwina's hand in his, quiet and unafraid, and by every account from those present, completely at peace. In the years after his death, the family stayed protective, and then gradually RJ began speaking, not to expose his father, but to explain him with the honesty that distance from grief eventually allows. The picture that emerged through his words was one the public had only partially seen before. Dwina confirmed the open marriage without performance or resentment, describing the arrangement with the calm of someone who had made her peace with it long ago. The affair with Clare Yang and Snow's birth in 2008 were acknowledged, and the family had managed the situation entirely outside of the courts, choosing privacy over the public conflict that ruins other celebrity families. Robin's estate, estimated at £26 million, went primarily to Dwina, Spencer, Melissa, and RJ, with Snow provided for separately and without fanfare, a decision made deliberately to protect everyone involved from unnecessary exposure and the kind of exploitation that follows celebrity death. What RJ shared about the final days is what stays with people longest. He described holding his father's head and telling him they loved him as Robin took his last breaths. He talked about late nights in the studio during his own childhood, watching his father write music not because deadlines required it, but because Robin genuinely had no idea how to exist without it. RJ now performs some of his father's unpublished compositions, carrying a voice forward that the world lost far too soon, and that deserved far more time than it was given. What Robin's children have confirmed, through every carefully measured word and every quiet admission across years of interviews, is something his music always seemed to suggest but never quite said directly. Behind the harmonies and the headlines, behind the marriages and the professional feuds, and the decades of sustained creative output that permanently shaped popular music and global songwriting culture, Robin Gibb was a man who loved with full intensity, who carried private battles that rarely surfaced publicly, and who held on to music the way other people hold on to the one thing that keeps them from falling apart. His story wasn't finished the way he would have wanted, but his family is finishing it now, and they are doing it with the honesty and care that his life, in all its complication and beauty, always deserved.